Hi everybody, this is Professor Paul Hicks coming to you again. Today I want to talk to you about writing philosophy papers and how a philosophy paper, say, may differ from an English paper. So I'm giving you an opportunity for extra credit in this class, and what you need to do is write on one of the two topics that I posted online, and you need to provide an argument. And fundamentally, what a philosophy paper is about an argument. So if you remember at the beginning of the semester, what is an argument? That is, an argument is a set of claims such that one claim is thought to be supported by the others. In other words, what's happening with an argument is the author is attempting to prove some sort of point to you. They're trying to get you to believe a particular proposition is true based upon some sort of evidence or some sort of good reasoning practices. And so in a philosophy paper, that's what you're going to do. You're going to need to provide an actual argument, a unique argument, and you're going to have to prove a particular point. All right? So let's go ahead and get into this. So when you're writing philosophy papers, there's usually two types of philosophy papers that we talk about. There's what's called an argumentative paper and what's called an expository paper. You're writing an argumentative paper. We are not doing expository papers. So what's the difference between the two? An expository paper is just laying out a particular argument. That is, you're really exposing an argument that somebody else created or wrote about. You're not really analyzing it. You're not being very critical with it. You're just exposing it. What I want you to do is to write your own argument, and this is going to be considered an argumentative paper. So you need to come up with your own unique argument for your actual position. Now, when we talk about philosophy papers, typically they're broken up into 4 different sections, and you want to write this down. Number 1, you're going to have the introduction. Number 2, you're going to have the exposition. Number 3, you're going to have an evaluation. And number 4, you're going to have a conclusion. So let's go ahead and start talking about each of these parts of a philosophy paper. So in a argumentative paper that's starting out with some sort of introduction, here's essentially what needs to be put into an introduction. What I'm looking for you to do is to introduce a particular topic. So, you know, for example, if you're talking about, say, the existence of God, or maybe say the problem of evil, to be more specific, you would say something like, you know, while it's maybe true that so many people have believed in God, there seems to be a contradiction with the presence of evil and the existence of God, something like that. And then what I wanted to see in your introduction is not just the motivation of the problem, but also I need you to give me a very explicit thesis. That is, you're going to say, I will argue that the problem of evil, just as an example here, right? You'll say, and you will use the word I. This is really important. You will use the word I and say, I will argue that, say, the problem of evil proves God does not exist. Or I will argue, say, that there is no need for evidence to believe the proposition God exists because it's obvious, or something like that. So notice what we have here is we have a very explicit thesis. That is to say, I know exactly what your position happens to be, and you also then want to give me a brief description of your actual argument. So I should know with your thesis, what is your position and why do you hold that particular position? All right. Another thing that you're going to want to do in the introduction is that if you have any sort of terms that need to be defined, this is the place to actually define them. So for example, if you're writing on a particular topic of God, you need to define what type of God you're talking about. So typically we talk about a Judeo-Christian God, which is an all-powerful, all-knowing, perfectly morally good being, an omnipresent being, something like that. So write and tell me what you actually mean by any sort of definitions that might be considered vague. Now for your paper, an introduction should not go past, say, 2 paragraphs. Right? This should be done very, very quickly. But by the time I'm done with your first couple paragraphs, keep in mind, I need to know what your position is and why you hold that position. So by the time that I'm done with the first 2 paragraphs, I should really know where this paper happens to be going. Okay, so when you're done with the first section of the paper, then you're going to move to the second section of the paper, and this is what we call the exposition. here you're going to go ahead and take your actual argument. So the best way to do this is to lay your argument out in standard form. So if you remember at the beginning of the semester, we talked about standard form. This is where you have, say, one premise, premise 2, and premise 3 leading to a conclusion. And in doing so, what you can do is you could take each premise and make it a topic sentence of your paragraph. What the goal of the exposition is to do is to prove that your thesis is actually right. And so you're going to enumerate the position that you have and the reasons that you have for whatever your thesis happens to be. So if you need to do two things in having an argument. That is, one, your premises actually support the conclusion. That is your thesis. And two, your premises are actually true. And this is what you're going to focus in on in your actual exposition, not the evaluation. All right. What your goal is to make each step as clear as possible so that your reader fully understands what your actual position is and why you actually hold it. This is going to be the bulk of your paper, right? You're going to, say, maybe have 3 to 5 paragraphs on this. All right, now when you're done with the exposition, then you're going to move into the evaluation. Here I want to know, what is the other side saying to your position? Why would a reasonable, rational person hold a position which is different than yours? Why would a reasonable, rational person disagree with your thesis or some part of your argument? And so essentially, what are some objections to your argument? This is where you're going to consider that. When you're writing out your objection, what you want to do is you want to have a full paragraph where you just detail out what the objection is. I don't want you to overcome it yet in this paragraph. I just want you to lay out the actual objection. See, it's important because until you lay out the objection, I don't actually know whether your response to that objection is a good one. So fully lay it out first. Take an entire paragraph of laying out the objection, and then take the next paragraph and overcome that particular objection. All right. Another thing that's really important here is you don't want to intermingle Section 2 and Section 3. In English, they often teach you something called persuasive writing, where you will write out a certain position and then you'll immediately consider whatever objections are to that. You don't want to do that in a philosophy paper. You need to lay out your entire argument before you actually consider any objections, because once again, I don't know if your objections are actually going to your argument or how good the objection is until you fully laid out your actual argument. All right, so for your papers, you're going to want to have about 1 or 2 objections that you consider and overcome. All right, in the fourth part of your paper is what we're going to call the conclusion. And in your conclusion, all you're trying to do is wrap up your paper and just kind of, tie everything up, tie up any loose ends, and give this to your reader to read. So in your conclusion, what you're really looking to do is to really just show us, as the reader, what you've actually done. So I need you to restate your thesis. I need you to restate the basic issues that you've explained in the second section. So what are the essential premises to your argument? And 3, I need you to restate any sort of criticisms that you explained and defended in Section 3. All right, so you're just kind of wrapping it up and you're condensing your entire paper into one paragraph. So let's think about this. So your introduction is going to be 1 to 2 paragraphs. Your exposition is probably going to be 3 to 5, probably closer to 5. Your evaluation, you're going to have 1 paragraph which details an objection. Then you'll have another paragraph immediately which will overcome that particular objection. And so you're going to have a minimum of 2 paragraphs. And if you come up with a couple objections, the more you consider, the better you're doing. If you come up with more objections, you're going to have, say if you have 2 objections, you're going to have at least 4 paragraphs, something like that. Then your conclusion is only going to be 1 paragraph. So this is going to be the basic structure of what your argument should actually say. All right, now here's a few things. In your conclusion, there should be no surprises. I don't want to see any new argument or any new evidence in your conclusion. Your conclusion is supposed to just kind of wrap up what you're trying to say. All right? As far as citation style, the American Philosophical Association tends to use the Chicago Manual style, and I have given to you some examples of that. Look in the Sacramento State, the CSUS How to Write a Philosophy Paper, and it gives you examples of how to actually cite with Chicago Manual style. All right, now let me go ahead and talk about some very common problems, and especially with certain words here. Then versus than. Then, T-H-E-N versus than, T-H-A-N. I see this a lot. There's a lot of problems that students often confuse these two words. These two words mean something very fundamentally different. So for example, then, T-H-E-N, you're going to use this a lot in a philosophy paper because you're talking about temporal or logical order. So for example, then we might say, if X is true, then Y is true. All right? You're saying that here are these premises which lead to this conclusion. Or you could say in time, we went to the grocery store, then we went to the movies. Something like that. The other one, than, T-H-A-N, is going to be a comparison. So you might say something along the lines of Jack is stronger than Jill. Something like that. You're comparing two things. So let's try to keep those in order. Another problem that I often see in a philosophy paper is you use a lot of very clumsy words. So for example, students will use very, basically, really. What is the point of these words? When we talk about a philosophy paper, philosophers choose their words very carefully. And every word means something, and every word in your paper should mean something. You shouldn't have a lot of fluff words, right? I don't want to see a lot of words added just to kind of fluff up your actual word count. I've been in college a lot longer than you. I've been teaching college for a lot longer than you've been in college, and I'm telling you, I can see this pretty easily when students start to do this, and that's going to lower your grade dramatically if you do something like that. Another thing that we do in philosophy is we don't actually feel our position. So, for example, often I'll see somebody say something like, I just feel God exists, or I feel that one ought to help poor people. In philosophy, we're not feeling our positions. We're thinking our positions. We're presenting arguments for our positions. So you would never say, well, I feel that way. Or you would never say, well, Alvin Plantinga just feels God exists. No, Alvin Plantinga argued God exists. You see, there's a difference here. You don't feel your positions, you argue your positions. And this is what you want to keep in mind. Another thing that I often see, and I think this comes from your texting culture with younger generations, is capital letters should not be used for emphasis. So sometimes what I often find is people will try to make one word stand out and they'll capitalize each letter. That's something you do in texting. That's not something you do in an academic paper. So let's try to stay away from something like that. Let's avoid, remember, in your paper, every word, every sentence should really mean something. Don't just put in a bunch of words. So don't use a bunch of empty claims. So for example, if you were to say, from this point forward, other issues that Descartes proclaims in Meditations are expressed and thoroughly reasoned. All right, what is that really saying here? What point is really being made with those particular sentences? Are you really just saying Descartes expresses and reasons about some issues? What is the point of saying that? It's already obvious. We know that Descartes reasoned about some issues. So you're not adding anything new for your reader. So there's really no point in actually saying that. Okay, let's now talk about paragraphs. What is a paragraph? Think about what a paragraph is. A paragraph in a philosophy paper is going to be a complete thought. So in a paragraph, your first sentence is going to be your topic sentence. Now what I want you to do is to sort of look at a paragraph sort of like the paper itself. You're going to have the introductory statement, and this is going to be a mini thesis. That is what this paragraph is particularly talking about. And then you're going to have an exposition of that mini thesis. You're going to give me a couple supporting sentences for why it is that your mini thesis is actually held to be true and why it supports the premise, or why it supports the conclusion. And then you're going to sort of just wrap it up, right, at the very end. So you think about a paragraph as being a complete thought. If what you're going to do, if you're going to start a new idea or start talking about a new thought, you need to start a new paragraph. All right? If you're making a new point, make a new paragraph to make that point. Don't try to shove it all in. Another thing that I want to talk about is your basic writing style. Right? So think about this. Who are you writing to? So many times I will see something along the lines of, as we discussed in class. Remember, when you're writing a paper, don't tell me as we discussed in class, because you're not writing the paper to me. Yes, I'm grading it, and yes, I'm going to be the one to read it. But the point of the paper, of an academic paper, is so that anybody who is not really familiar on this particular topic will, one, understand the topic and understand your position on that topic. Keep your wording professional. Another thing is you want to avoid cliches in writing. One of the pet peeves that so many of my colleagues and I have when it comes to philosophy papers is certain cliches. So how many times have I read a paper that started out, "For thousands of years, philosophers have argued"? All right, what's the point of saying that? What does that bring to us? It's just, fluff words. It's just adding words that don't make any sort of contribution to the paper whatsoever. So try to avoid doing that. The other thing you want to try to avoid is using any sort of autobiographical details. So for example, there's a couple topics that I gave you to write on. Don't tell me why you chose one topic over another. I don't need to know. It's not important. All right, if you're choosing one topic, just write on that topic. Don't write out why you chose that topic or why that topic's important to you or anything of that sort, because that's not relevant to the argument itself. So keep that in mind. Let's see. Another problem that I often see in philosophy papers, the students will add more fluff words such as "I believe X" or "in my opinion." Look, you don't need to say that. Those are just extra words. The fact that you say, so you want to say, for example, "In my opinion, the problem of evil proves God does not exist." Just say, "The problem of evil proves God does not exist." You don't need to say "in your opinion." You are the author. Of course it's your opinion. We understand that by the fact that you wrote the actual paper. So, another odd thing that philosophers do is when we talk about certain philosophers, we talk about them in the present tense. So even though, say, Plato has been dead for 2,400 years, we still say Plato believes, right? As if Plato is still here with us. The reason being is, while we certainly know Plato is dead, his ideas are still very much alive with us, and there are still very smart, rational philosophers who hold these particular positions. So don't talk about philosophers in the past tense. Talk about them in the present tense, such as Plato argues, not Plato argued. All right, let's talk about quotes. One, I want you to try to stay away from quotes. Sometimes quotes can help you if you're making some sort of real particular point about what somebody says and you need to prove it, then you say it in a quote. For the most part, I want you to stay away from quotes. But if a quote is necessary, then here's what you need to do. You need to introduce the quote, and you need to explain why you use that quote. What I often find in some philosophy papers is some student will write just a quote, but they don't really tell me why they gave that quote. Or another problem is they use that quote as a substitute for their own argumentation. I already know what these other philosophers have argued. I need to know what you can argue. So when I'm grading you based off your words and your argumentation. The quote isn't going to help you. So really try to stay away from that, and so really try to stay focused in on what your position is and why it is the most rational actual position. Okay. You're going to need to also have a works cited page, so let's go ahead and make sure that you do. I'm also going to want to make sure that there's no spelling mistakes. Look, you have you're going to write this on, a Microsoft Word or Google Docs or something like that. There is a spell check on that. Make sure you use it, right? I don't want to see a lot of spelling errors, a lot of punctuation mistakes. Now, keep in mind, I'm not an English teacher here. I'm not trying to grade you on did you use the comma right or something like that. What I'm grading you on is your argument. Do you have good premises, and is your conclusion reasonable from those given premises? So always stay focused in on that. All right, so when you're evaluating any sort of argument, if you're going to criticize somebody's argument, there's really only two ways to do it. What you're going to say is that the premises, or at least one premise, is false, or that the premises in fact don't lead to the conclusion, that they don't really support the conclusion. So stay focused in on something like that. So, all right. Another problem that I often see students make is they'll write with rhetorical questions. This is not something you want to do. Remember, I'm grading you based upon your premises leading to conclusions. Your premises have a truth value, but questions do not have a truth value, and therefore I can't grade them. So you wouldn't want to say something along the lines of, well, who is Socrates to make such a statement? Or, who is to say what a just society is? Or how does Hume know there's no physical substance? Or something like that. Those are rhetorical questions. You need to keep all questions out. If you're writing your paper and you put a question mark, you're probably doing something wrong, so don't do that. You can always rephrase the question, a rhetorical question, into a statement. So instead of saying, who's to say what a just society is, what you could do is just lay it out. A just society is, or something along those lines. You don't need to put it into a question. So no rhetorical questions in your paper, no unanswered questions in your paper. Your paper is there to solve a problem, not just to pose questions. All right. So one last thing that I want to talk about is the gendered terms. So often there's certain words that people use, such as, say, for example, mankind. Mankind is often used to substitute for all of humanity. There's problems with this because what it does is that it leaves women out in our thinking, and this is not something we want. So for example, let's say that you were writing a particular paper on a brain surgeon, all right? So imagine saying something along the lines of, the brain surgeon is doing X, Y, and Z, and then she stimulated the motor skill centers in the patient brains. You notice that when I said she, you took immediate note of that because this upset a certain expectation, where if I would have used the word he, the pronoun he, that would not have made any note in your mind because there's an expectation that the doctor was a male. So you want to stay away from something like that. Don't use he or don't use she. Talk about humanity, not mankind. Right? Varying your examples and avoiding words like man and mankind are going to benefit men and women alike. And if we are going to be a better society, this is something that we actually need to do. Okay? So there's a real brief breakdown of what your philosophy paper should look like. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. And like I said, this paper is extra credit. You don't absolutely have to do it, but it's for those of you that might be struggling in the class, it's probably a good thing that you do. All right? Stay safe, guys. Bye.